And when the heart rate goes up, there's a reason for this. When people tell me, it was hot and the heart rate was higher, it was hot, the heart rate was higher, means higher stress for the body. Even if there's an explanation why the stress is higher, but it is a higher stress.
That Triathlon Show 175. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Jan Lorang. Dan's main job is as the performance coach and head of innovation of the Bora Hansgrohe professional cycling team, but he's also a triathlon coach and coaches among others Jan Frodeno. You might have heard of him. He's a former Olympic champion and Ironman 70.3 world champion. Also, he coaches athletes like Anne Haug and Justus Nieschlag and Sarah True as well. I had the great pleasure of meeting Dan when he came to Lisbon to hold a 2-day seminar for Portuguese triathlon coaches. And I walked away from that seminar with so many great insights, and that I hope that the same will be the case for you today. And I think it will, because it's a long interview. Once again, it's a training masterclass. So I really think that you'll find a lot of value from it. But before we get into the interview, big thanks to our sponsors. First, we have Precision Hydration that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Also, very recently, Q&A number 27, which came out on last Thursday, actually, so 28th of March 2019. That one had Andy Blow coming on as an expert guest, and Andy is, of course, the founder of Precision Hydration, and he talked about cramping and all the expert knowledge that he has gained in that area. So do go and listen to that if you missed it. Also, I don't know if you're listening to perhaps the Training Peaks Coachcast podcast, but Andy Blow also appeared on that podcast recently, and it was a great interview as well, and a good introduction to the need for individualization of hydration, which is what precision hydration is all about. So basically, they can help you find your individual electrolyte needs for training and racing, and then you can get electrolytes that match that sort of electrolyte need that you have. So go to precisionhydration.com, check out their free online sweat test, and if you want to buy any other products, you can get your first box for free with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps. And big thanks to Roka that you can find on roka.com. Roka are the world leaders in wetsuits, tri-suits, apparel, and performance eyewear. And they are used by athletes like Katie Zafiris, Gwen Jorgensen, Mario Mola, and many, many others of the top triathletes and endurance athletes in the world. And just from a personal experience, I can say that I used, I think, at least 3 different wetsuit brands before I started using Roka wetsuits, and some of them were high-end wetsuits, so very much comparable to the Roka wetsuit that I use now. And none of them were anywhere close, I want to say, to the performance that I get in the Roka Maverick X wetsuit that I'm using now. So I really like Roka. All of their gear is really high quality, really fast. It's made to perform, put simply. You can get 20% off your entire order on roka.com with the promo code TTS, and that is all caps. So without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Jan Lorang. So today's guest on That Triathlon Show is Jan Lorang, and Dan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome. Also, I'm really happy that you invite me to the show, and I already hear to some other interviews that you did in the past. So I hope our interview will be as interesting as the old one was.
So which ones did you listen to? Which ones were your favorites?
The favorite, because I really like to listen, is to Joel Filiol. So one of the last ones, and I really liked it, and because we in the past we also discussed about training. We have a good relationship, so it was nice to hear him to talk about the different topics.
Yeah, Perfect. And we have a lot to cover, so let's just jump into the questions and the training talk that we have with you today. So the first thing that I wanted to discuss, and a lot of these questions, by the way, for the listeners' knowledge, are based on a presentation that you did, a seminar for coaches here in Portugal, in Lisbon, where we connected a few months ago. And the topic of focusing on maximum adaptation rather than maximum training was something that I took away as a key takeaway from that presentation. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean with that?
Mm-hmm. So in general, I think it's important that we make we all know there's a difference from athlete to athlete, and there is also a difference about how much training or how much of the stimulus in the end also comes to a result. So what I mean is, when you train, you want to build up performance, and when you invest a lot of hours, you also want to have the result out of this. And depending on where the athlete is during his career, so how much he had already done in the past, what is his physiology, there's a certain amount of impact that is good for him, or that he can transform into performance. And if he's doing more, at some point, perhaps he just will get fatigue. And the next step, perhaps when he's doing this over weeks or months, perhaps is going to kind of overreaching, overtraining, and that's something we really don't want to have. So what I mean is, what I try to find with my athletes is to find the right amount of training. So to go for sure to the limit, because for the moment we are just training some high performance athletes. So we are not trying to have a too big gap between what is possible and what we are doing. So we try to go to the limit, but also to consider how much of the training volume or the training intensity or both is really necessary to reach the next step in the performance buildup. For example, when we take one parameter, the oxygen consumption, there is, I can explain it really easily. There's a certain amount of oxygen that you can use, let me say it per day or perhaps per week, if we take an average, to build up or to have some anabolic processes in your body. So to really build up something. And this amount of oxygen is linked to your VO2 or VO2max. And it's also a link to how much training you did already in the past, or even in the professional athletes when they start at the beginning of the season. I think that's a quite logical example. It makes no sense to start in the first aerobic endurance session with 5 hours on the bike or or long runs or whatever from the beginning on. So there must be a difference between the first weeks of training and when you are in the middle of the training period. And one reason for this is that even if you're doing this long rides, because perhaps on the bike it's possible, you will see there's no, it's just some kind of overloading over these 5 hours. Perhaps it's enough to do at the beginning 2.5, or depending on the athletes. And the problem here is that there is not so much evidence about this. So there's no book that tells you, okay, you should go for this kind of athlete about, you start with 2 hours, then you're doing 2.5 and then 3 or whatever. That is something that you try to measure in training. For example, one parameter could be what we find in most of the softwares, the aerobic decoupling. So when we take an easy training session over 2 hours, for example, when we look at the power, when we look at the heart rate, and when we see at one point that the heart rate is really going up suddenly, perhaps this is also the point where we see, okay, the stimulus that I want to give here to have an easy aerobic session is perhaps enough at that point. And we train that we put this point or that we get further in the next sessions, but to find some kind of measuring to define these points. I know also people who are using the HRV during training to see there some changes and to see, okay, now we leave the training effective zone. But it's quite hard to find this. But in the end, to bring it to the end, it's important to understand that it's not that we just training a lot to have the maximum adaptation, but we want to have the maximum adaptation possible at different phases during the year. And then for this, you need a certain amount of training. And to find this right amount of training, that is, in my eyes, also a key for building up an athlete over the years.
And on a macro level, from a big picture perspective, so not looking at a single workout, but perhaps looking at a training block or a training week, how do you find the limit? What the limit is at the moment for the athlete? Is there anything in particular that you look for to know if you're giving them enough but not too much training?
Mm-hmm. To be honest, this is really a big part of doing years of training, of coaching with different athletes, and then looking what did they do in the past. So when I start to work with a new athlete, is for sure I want to know what did he in the past, then know his metabolic profile, know, for example, how is his VO2max, and then it's also the problem is that the different systems of your body, muscles, the cardiovascular system, the neural system, so they react on a different way. So it could be that from the aerobic system or from the cardiovascular system, you could do more training, but perhaps the muscles are already at the limit or another system. So there it's some kind of approaching to the point or getting the feedback from the athletes from these different kind of systems. For the cardiovascular system, perhaps, like I said, we can use this the heart rate, we can use the watts speed, we can see this aerobic decoupling. From the muscular side, for sure, we should use the feedback of the athletes, or if the athletes go to a physiotherapist, the feedback from them. How do the muscles feel? Some information that the athlete is giving you. So I try to find the right combination between some technical parameters or some parameters that are measured, combined to what the athlete is really telling me, or the support stuff. Because some athletes, they have support stuff. So like I mentioned, physiotherapist, or perhaps, I don't know, psychologist or nutritionist or whatever, and collecting these informations and try to see, okay, does this feedback correspond to what I want to have him in training? So, for example, if I start a 3-week training block, so with 3 weeks going up with the load over each week, and I get already the feedback after the first week, I'm really tired and the muscles feel quite stiff, and and then perhaps some other people tell me, but he's looking a little bit strange, his mood is not good or whatever. I see, okay, that was not the goal of the first training week. So I went really far. And if you have the possibility to be on the deck with the athletes every day, then it's for sure also different, because then you see the athletes every day. But if you don't have this possibility, then you need a good combination of athlete feedback and measuring. And the possibility that you can measure some parameters.
That makes sense. And one thing that you mentioned there with what they have done in the past in terms of the amount and type of training, how do you use that? So let's say you have 2 new athletes coming to you. One is a 30-year-old who's been an elite triathlete for 10 years, and one is a 20-year-old who's just coming up through the junior ranks perhaps and trying to make it at the top level and don't have that same training background. How does that impact then your decision making on how much training to give them to get maximum adaptation?
Mm-hmm. So the easiest way is if the athletes have some kind of documentation of their training. So if you see, okay, there is, for example, somebody can tell you or can show you what he did the last year, that is quite helpful to get a good judgment about what kind of load the body has already had in the past. And that is quite interesting to see. And then also to talk with the athletes about his experience. So if you see with the young athlete of 20 years that he trained already weeks of 30 hours, so 30 training hours a week, but that he tells you, yeah, there were different phases when I was really, really tired and I could not move, and I recovered really badly or whatever, or perhaps some kind of injuries or some kind of getting sick more often than usual. Perhaps you then already see, okay, there's a big gap between what is good for him and what he did in the past. And then you have to make there the adaptation. Also, on the other way around, if you had a 30-year-old athlete, and for sure you expect already a really high training level. When you look at the past data, you can see perhaps already what you can take out of this. And on the other side, see some, mistakes is always a bad word, but see something that went perhaps wrong, and you can learn from that. And that's why the information from the past, they are not my main decision maker, but they give me already some input. So when I meet the athlete the first time, we talk really a lot, perhaps hours, about how he felt in the past, perhaps what he did, where he see himself, or what he thinks about could be good for him. And I try then to bring this picture together. And in the end, my goal is to make the athlete understand what happens in the last years. So why he was perhaps successful or why he was perhaps not successful. And then to show him up, okay, that's the way how we want to continue. For example, I had now with the cyclist got a new rider who was already successful last year with some wins, and who told me, okay, he was used to train quite shortly and hard, and he did this now the last 2 years, and this was really a game changer for him. So he had the feeling that he got better with this, and that he was not so good in the past. And then you have to analyze this. You see that, for sure, he had some reduced training, perhaps not the volume that you would do with him to bring him on to keep him on a world tour level. But then you bring in your knowledge, and you can tell him, okay, listen, that works for sure for 1 or 2 years, but if you continue on that way, this will happen with your metabolism, this will happen with your endurance. So perhaps you have to go back to a system that you feel was not so successful, with going up with the hours and changing a little bit, but this is better, or this is really necessary that you can continue on that level your career. And if you can explain him also why perhaps we change, why we go up with the hours, why we change from 25 or from 20 going to 25 up to 30, and having more training sessions, more consistency than he had in the past. And he has to believe in this, but you can explain why you're changing something that was quite successful. And it's not always like this. It's not always that you change something, but there are sometimes situations where you see, okay, we have to change this and to continue to be successful or to get successful. And with a 30-year-old athlete who has a lot more experience, perhaps you have to explain more and to be more convinceful about what you want to change than with a 20-year-old athlete who is at the beginning of his career and who is really looking for the input, and who will in general follow you in the first month and see what's going to happen. And I think this is the main difference, the high experience level from the older athletes compared to the young, not so experienced athletes who will just do, perhaps not ask too much questions. He will just do, and the older athlete will perhaps ask more questions.
And final question or follow-up on this topic of maximum adaptation. How do you think that it applies to age groupers? Because for age groupers, we're nowhere near, I guess, the limit because of other things, jobs, families, etc. So, but what are the things that we can take away and maybe apply as it pertains to this topic?
I think with the age grouper, we have the factor. Most of the age grouper, they are following a normal job. So they have not so much time to train. So there it's really, and that's you have to consider. So when you build up a training plans, on one hand, you see, okay, what did he in the past? Perhaps we can up from 5 to 10% on it, put in a little bit more volume or intensity or whatever. But we always have to take care on the other side about this stress factor, what is around the sport. So always to deal with this and to see, okay, what I tell for the high performance athlete, that you need consistency in training, is also true for the age grouper. So perhaps it's better to train a little bit less and to get not sick and not injured, and to be able to deal better with this external stress, as to try to go hard on different sessions, and then you got the problem with your immune system, you got sick, you got stressed, you don't enjoy what you're doing there. So there it's even more difficult to find the right load. And with load, I don't not mean only the training, but I mean the whole picture. So the whole family, work, training, and everything what is linked to this person, because all of this has an influence on the performance, on the outcome. And as a coach, you have to consider this. It's not that you can just plan your training and that's it. You have also to consider the other way around. So you're a little bit more like a manager in that situation. And with elite athletes, it's easier. If their sport is their job, then for sure it's on the first place, and it has they make it possible what is necessary to do for the training or for the recovery.
That makes sense. And the consistency that you mentioned there, that can, I guess, almost be used as a proxy for maximum adaptation, at least when you look at it from a long-term perspective. So that's why in the short term you might want to reduce training to make sure that in the long term you have the most amount of consistency.
That is important. And to mention also one situation with the age grouper, when they go to training camps, now in general they go up with the training volume. They double it or even more in the training camps for 1 or 2 weeks. And in some point it's okay to go up like this, but you have also there to take care that you are not overdoing it there, that you're not saying, okay, no, I have 2 weeks where I can just focusing on training and then doing the double of it. The body can compensate this to a certain point, but at one point it's not able to compensate, and then you come back from the training camp and you get sick, and then you're 1 week out of the training, and then nearly half of the effect is already gone. So that is a really dangerous situation for age group athletes in the training camp, to find there the right load, because they have more time and think, okay, now I paid to get to the south, now I have to train a lot and use every second. It's not so. It's challenging to find there the right amount. For sure, when you look at the percentage that you are doing more in the training camp, so what the age group athlete is doing more in training camp compared to the professional, there's a bigger difference for sure. But still, it's not that you can just go to the maximum limit and think that your body will just not react on this on a bad way, but it will react, and you have to take care of it.
Yeah, definitely. That was actually the episode before this was on training camps. So the listeners that haven't listened to it can go and listen to that. Uh-huh. So let's move on to the next topic, which is on structuring training over the course of a season. And for example, to make it a bit more concrete, we can, for example, consider that an athlete is training for an Ironman event, let's say Kona, or whatever. That is like the main goal. So what? How would you structure the training over a season from a high level perspective, leading up to an event like that?
Mm-hmm. In general, I have a structure. I start with the priorities first. At the beginning of the season, the priority is higher on technique. So it doesn't matter if it's now swimming, running, or on the bike. So technique. Then we are working on speed, strength, and then economization. So that's some kind of the big bricks in that wall for the build up. And we could also, from when we look from the metabolic side, it's also so during the technique phase, you just come back to training, so you just get your body used to training, so to get back to regular training, to build up the muscular structure, to make them ready, and then generally we are working on the maximum oxygen uptake, so some VO2max training, and this is when that's why I mentioned on one hand speed, on the other hand VO2max. So the one thing is the metabolic, what is going to happen from the metabolic side, and the other thing is what's really happening on the field. So if we're working on VO2max intervals and run, for example, or we do them as hill reps, or we do them in the flat, if you do some 200 meters intervals, for example, it's also some kind of speed work. So you're working on the speed, and then comes the a long period where strength endurance, where they take a big part of the training, and then 8 to 12 weeks before the main competition, you should use what you build up before to and make it economically. So try to teach your body to get the best out of it, but in a really economical way when we talk about Ironman training. And that is in some simple words how I'm doing the build up with nearly all of my long distance athletes. For sure, you have some differences from some athletes who are already more, or who have more strength from nature, or who have more speed from nature, or who have more problems to make to work economically. So perhaps there you shift a little bit. So you give more importance to one of these phases, but in general, that is some kind of a build up. And it's not that I do it from day one to race day, but we repeat this kind of cycles several times in the preparation to the Ironman. And for this, we're using, for example, some half Ironman races in the preparation. For example, 2 half Ironman races, 2 70.3 races up to the Ironman. And to these 70.3 races, we do this cycle every time. So we start with technique, speed, strength, economization, and then at some point comes the race, recovery, and then we start again with this cycle. And then comes the race, and then we start again. So there are in general 2 to 3 cycles until the main race that are built up on a quite similar way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. With the economization phase, I think I assume that refers to, like, you do quite a lot of race pace specific training in that phase. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's some race pace training, but also below race pace. So this, what you could call perhaps sweet spot training on the bike or on the run. It doesn't matter. Also to train the fat oxidation. So this long runs, long rides, where you teach your body to use the energy from the fat acids. This is also some kind of economization, so that the body gets used to this. And for sure, we for long distance triathlon, there we also using this kind of race pace efforts, because it's good to teach the muscles to work for a longer time in that intensity zone. And on the other side, it's not so stressful. It's not like if we're talking about Olympic distance triathlon, where for sure, if you go a lot of time in race pace, you will just be exhausted in the training. So it's a different approach. But when we're talking about long distance training, there the metabolic impact of race pace is less higher than when we're talking about the high intensities that we have on shorter distances.
Yes, yeah. And can you just give a couple of examples of workouts that you might do in each phase? It doesn't matter which discipline, if you take the swim or the bike or the run, but just to give the listeners some examples of what a typical workout for the technique phase, the speed VO2max phase, and the strength phase might look like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we can make it perhaps easier to focusing on one discipline. For example, when we take the run, so in the technique phase, what we are doing there is, on one point, we build up the easy endurance run. But in this endurance run, for example, we run 10-minute warm-up or 15 minutes warm-up, then doing some technical exercise. So I think the listeners, they know there are a lot of running technique exercise that you can do. So we have a catalog of, I don't know, 30 or 40 different exercises. And then I tell the athletes, okay, during this run, you run 10 minutes, then you're doing three exercises, about 10 seconds. First with a low speed of, so first you're really focusing on how to do it, and then we go up with the speed. So with the speed of executing the exercise, then you continue your easy run and so on. So you build in your easy runs, you build in some technical exercises. So that is not just, we go for long runs or we go for running, but we use this run to be really focused on the technique, and also to break the rhythm with this exercises. So or I give a topic for a run and say, okay, it's an easy run, but the topic is to keep your hip in a good position, or to stay really straight, or to lean a little bit forward, or whatever. So or to have a high frequencies in your strides. So there's a topic, and then there are also some exercises from this topic in the easy run. For sure, we are also doing just easy runnings, but that's in the technique phase. And then we are working with really short intervals, about 50 meters, 60 meters, up to 100 meters, where we are going already, or where we teach the body already to run fast, but on a really short section. Because that's, I don't know which coach just said somewhere, but how do you want to run, or how do you want to run fast over 10K if you're not able to run probably fast over 100 meter? So that's why just focusing on these short distances, because you teach your body to use a good technique to run fast. You have only short intervals, so no big risk of injuries. You have some really a good possibility to build in some technical exercises, and it's also really nice for the athletes to do this kind of training. And from there on, we go over to we are doing some speed and VO2max training. So the VO2max training, that's a favorite session, and I think a lot of coaches know this and like it, is to do some kind of hill reps. So 30 seconds uphill with 30 to 1 minute easy, and doing, for example, 3 sets of 8 times 30 seconds uphill runs, and trying to reproduce always the same effort. So it's important that you're not going all out the first 30 seconds, but that you are able to produce the same intensity from the first 30 seconds to the last ones, and working on the VO2. And if you're doing this on the flat, what is also possible, so exactly the same set, but in the flat, on a straight road, or some athletes prefer the track, but I'm not so the big fan of the track. I'm like more to do it just on the street, on a straight line. There you can also do this kind of intervals, and there you're also working on speed, because if you want to go in the VO2max area, you need to go on a certain speed. And but for me, it's really important to tell the athletes the technique. So what we are learning in phase 1 has always still a big priority. So it could be that I see in a set, okay, the technique gets worse, or it gets worse, then we stop it there. Even if for the metabolic impact, it would be better to continue because we need more impact. But the beginning of the season, or in the first weeks, it's important to stop there, and to give the body also the possibility for the adaptation, because perhaps you can keep it for 2 sets, you can keep the core stability for 2 sets, but you are not ready for 3. So it's also some kind that you have where you have to wait until you are ready to really fulfill this sets. In general, it happens because you build up this kind of sets, so it happens with the build up. But it could be that one of the systems of your body is not ready for it, and then you have to reduce, or even to change the section. And then when we go to strength, There, we also like to, so there we have different sessions. Also, one session is long uphill runs. A classic one is, for example, 4 to 5 times, 2Ks uphill, intensity just below threshold, and trying to focus in there to keep the body stable, not to overdo it, because that's quite important that you're not going on high intensity there, but that you keep it, like I said, under threshold or just going to threshold. And then, so this is one typical session. For sure, you have to build up this. So it's not that you're going 4 or 5 times 2K uphill just from nothing, but you prepare this with 2 or 3 repetitions and then go on. It's also a session that is really good to do on the treadmill, because the advantage is that in the recovery, you can just go down with the treadmill and run 4 minutes easy, and then go up with the treadmill. When you do it outdoor, then you have to go down the hill. And what is also an impact, and it's quite a higher impact than if you would do it on the treadmill. But also this you can use. So later in the season, you can use this this kind of downhill training also to have some adaptation in muscles, just as the point. Yeah. And and then the economization phase, it's what I said, it's about long runs. It's about going in race pace, for example, 1-2, so 1K race pace, 2K easy, for example, over a long run, over 20, 25 Ks. And that would be one typical session also for working on the economization.
Perfect. And you said that you cycle through these 2 or 3 times, probably, maybe depending on what the season looks like with other races. But just as an example, after the off season, when you do the first cycle of these 4 phases, how long, for example, might the different phases be the first time that you cycle through them? How long is the technique phase, and then the speed phase, and etc.?
Mm-hmm. So I think to better understand it to the listeners, the length of the phase changes during the period. So at the beginning, every phase is longer. So when we start, the technique phase is in general about, let me say, 3 to 4 weeks. Then we come to the speed phase that goes again, also over 3 to 4 weeks. The strength phase is in general about, with the recovery, 7 to 8 weeks. And then comes the economization phase that has nearly the same length again. So around this, it depends a little bit on the goals, how much time you have. But then when you have the first competition, then you go, the length of the phases get shorter. Then perhaps we say, okay, during the recovery of the first competition, we start with the technique phase that is only 2 weeks. Then the speed one, we shorten it also to 2.5, and so on. So that's something you have to adapt. So at the beginning of the season, every phase has its biggest length, and then it changes. Or it could change when we have a deficit in some area, so that I say, okay, with this athlete, he has enough speed, so we have to work more on strength or more on the economization, or the other way around. If we see that the speed, that there's not enough speed, then it could be that we change. Yeah, but that's just a general approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. And finally, how do you build in recovery? You mentioned there that after the race, the technique phase forms natural recovery, but do you have, for example, when you have a big block of speed followed by strength, do you have weeks that are easier recovery weeks, or just recovery days, or how do you work that into the plan?
Mm-hmm. That is a little bit different from athletes to athletes. So I have athletes where we follow a clear structure. What I mean with classical structure, like, for example, 2 weeks of workload, 1 of recovery, or 3 weeks of growing volume, and then 1 week recovery. With 1 week recovery, I mean, 7 days where we go on lower volume, where the first day of the weeks are no intensity, no big volume, just easy sessions. So really time to recover. And the second block of the week there, we in general work on already again on the technique, or having some kind of mixture about technique and speed, seeing, it depends a little bit on how fast the athletes recover, but that we start again to work on the speed, but with a really low amount. So the volume always stays on a low level for the athlete, but the quality, let me call it like this, the quality on the speed goes up then at the second part of the week with some small, for example, in the run, 100-meter run or 200-meter runs, or some small speed exercises. And but with other athletes, sounds perhaps a little bit strange, but we doing recovery when the body needs it. So we have a big training block, let me say, of 6 to 8 weeks, and then when we see that the feeling of the athletes does not correspond to what we expect in training, or that he's far away from performances that he should be able to do even in a fatigue state, then we implement some days of easy training to recover and then go again. So there we don't follow always the same structure, but we adapt to how the body is really responding, because that's but that is only for really experienced athletes who really knows, who can give good feedback, who really knows good their body, and that you coach already for some years. So when I start to work with a new athlete, in general, I start with this really structured, good structure, or a standardized structure of loading and recovery. And from there on, we are moving over the years to a structure that is really more linked to, we try to go up to bring it to the limit as much as possible, and stop at the right point.
Right. Yeah. That sounds like a very smart approach. So let's dive deeper into the different disciplines, and perhaps we keep the theme of these discussions on long distance triathlon, because the differences could be potentially quite significant for short distance. So if you start with the bike, perhaps, what are your thoughts on how to structure bike training?
Mm-hmm. The phases that I mentioned before is a little bit the same for nearly all the sports. That is also for the bike training like this. So it depends a little bit on the amount of yada training, because bike training, the big advantage of the bike training in general is that you can do a good aerobic training, a lot of volume there, and without having the risk to get some big injuries in general. So if I have an athlete where who deals with in the past with more injuries coming from running, or where the biomechanical we call it so where is where we have more problem to realize a lot of running training. For sure, you are using also the bike for compensating some aerobic training, and with this athlete, it's different than with general triathletes that I train. So in general, my training approach is that we are building up the 3 disciplines on a quite same level. So it's not that we just saying, okay, we are focusing on the run or focusing on the bike or on the swim, but trying to have the quite parallel approach. For sure, when the athletes gets tired during training, perhaps we reduce the run on the swim, and we're still able to do a good work on the bike. But in general, the approach is to develop the 3 disciplines quite in a similar way. So in the bike training, we start with short rides, with some kind of cadence work. So working in different cadence areas, high cadence, low cadence, changes. When the athletes are training on the roller or even on outside, we are working on one leg exercises. But in general, we work a lot with cadence. What I want to achieve there is that the motoric pattern or the possibilities or the abilities of the athletes are quite big, even if we will never pedal at 120 or 130 cadence. But if we give the brain a bigger range of what it can do, then there's also a higher possibility to work more efficiently in the area that the athlete will use in the competition. So it's just about creating some new connections in the brain, having a higher possibility. It's like a VO2max. If you train your VO2max, it's a higher possibility that you can also use it in the end and use a higher or produce more power in the end in the race. And it's not just about the economization, but it's just first we open up the engine, what we are doing with VO2max, and with this cadence work, we are building up some more connections, some big neurostimulus, and from there on we go we continue to work. So some cadence work, then speed is sprinting, short efforts in training. For example, doing the easy runs, telling the athletes, okay, every 20 or 30 minutes, do a 6-second sprint out of the saddle, in the saddle. Working on a little bit on the bike technique, so on technical parts. This is all part of the first phase on the bike. And
can I ask about sprinting? Is that also for this neuromuscular development and motor patterns? Is that the reason that you want even long distance triathletes to practice sprinting?
And yeah, it's for this, but also to activate the fast twitch muscle fibers, because when the slow twitch muscle fibers, when they get tired, or when you come at a certain amount of your VO2, so if you produce a certain amount of power, you will also use the fast twitch muscle fibers. And if they are not trained, because you never train them, you have a problem. So it's that's why we are also training them in training. And another effect is when you're doing this kind of sprinting is you have let me take an old term for it, is non-lactate efforts with 6 to 8 seconds during an easy ride. Your oxygen uptake during that goes a little bit up. You continue your easy ride, and still your oxygen uptake at the moment is a little bit higher than it would be if you just continue the easy riding. So it's also a good method to make more efficient this long aerobic endurance ride and to bring some changes in training. But the main reason for it is really also to activate this fast twitch muscle fibers, to train them, and also to train them after 4 or 5 hours on the bike, for example, so that they get used to load too, and that they not just, because in some point in the race they will get activated, and when they are activated, and that does not mean that you will do a sprint in the race, but they are just activated because the muscle is using for more recruitments, more supply to be able to keep the effort, and that's why we train them.
Yep.
And then from this we go to strengths. Strengths I would split it in 2 parts. One is doing short efforts with quite in the anaerobic zone. For example, 2 times 5 times 1 minute with a big gear over threshold. So with a quite high impact. So working really on strengths. You can compare it a little bit when you go to the gym and doing perhaps 20 repetitions. For 20 repetitions, you also need perhaps 1 minute. And at the end of the 20 repetitions, you feel that your muscles are burning, just to describe it quite easily. And a little bit like this, we're working then also on the bike. And from this, the next step is to do this quite classical efforts with low gear work over a longer period. For example, 3 to 6 times 10 minutes, big gear around 40 to 60 cadence, and intensity just a little bit under threshold. And there we are working on, don't call it strength endurance, but call it perhaps endurance strength. And from the metabolic side, reducing the lactate building rate. So also working on the economization. And so that's then also a main part of the training. Not every training for sure. That's quite important to understand when we're talking about these different training phases. That does not mean that we are not using some other training sessions. When we are talking about speed training, it's not that every session is a speed session. For sure, we are also doing just easy aerobic training, but the goal or the what we want to develop in this part is this. And when we're on the force endurance section, then it's what we want to develop is the force endurance, is the better and a reducing of the lactate building rate. And then the economization is like we talked already at the beginning. There, when we go to race pace efforts, so try to use the capacity that we build up during the weeks before during race pace efforts.
Yeah. A couple of questions about cadence there. First, when you talked about increasing the comfortable range that we can handle, but then you can, I guess, you didn't say that actually. So my question is, do you basically let the athlete self-select cadence for their races, whatever that may be, or is there a range that you think is more effective in racing as well that you try to steer the athletes towards?
Mm-hmm. A really long time, so when I started working, I let them really do. So we observe what's happening at different cadences, also observing their self-selected cadence. And often it's the right cadence. So it's the cadence where they are working more economically. So that's why it's not so often the case that you say, okay, we completely change it. But it could be, for example, when an athlete comes from a short distance triathlon and changes to long distance triathlon, that I have one example in mind. When you have a really high cadence during racing, what could be good on the short distance to say, okay, perhaps the athlete save a little bit more the legs, so the more the muscles there. That this could be that he needs too much energy for the long distance triathlon if he continues to use this high cadence. That could be the case. And it's also not so easy to change it then from one day to another. But you will always, for example, try when we're doing a set of race pace intervals, let me say doing, 6 times 10 minutes race pace, doing it at different cadences, measuring perhaps lactate, measuring heart rate, but also the feeling, seeing the speed, and then decide, okay, what could be the right race pace for the athletes. But it's not that I say, okay, every athlete has to go at 85 or 70 or 90 revolutions per minute. So we try to find some individual cadence for every athlete.
Right. And then for the force endurance work, you mentioned, for example, doing intervals between 40 and 60 RPM, and you see different approaches. You see some prescribing sessions that are below 70 RPM, or even some considered below 80 RPM as force endurance. What's the reason for, in the example that you gave, using 40 to 60, and what's the general thought process there of how to select cadence for that type of low cadence work?
I think it's also some kind of a little bit definition, because if we're talking about strengths, we always must see, okay, how much muscle fibers or how much percent of the maximum possible strength is activated. And when we are working with, for example, or when we are working, for example, with 80 cadence, so 80 revolutions per minute, and producing there some effort around threshold, and if you would measure how much percentage of really power or of force you need, you will be quite you will not be around 80 or 90% of the maximum power that you're able to produce, what is in general defined, for example, as strength endurance training. Even with the 50 RPM, you are not so you are away from that. So if we are working with 80 RPM, we have just to ask us, okay, are we really doing strength training there, or are we just really changing the kind of muscle fiber or the capacity of the muscle fiber? So are we just changing the way how the muscle fibers are working? And I think that's only a definition thing. It's not that I say, okay, this training method is better than the other, but every training has some kind of adaptation. It's always the question of what is adapted at the end. Or for example, this kind of training with 50 to 60 RPM, they did this already I don't know, 50 or 60 years ago, so a long time ago, or when coaches see, okay, there are some improvements in performance, okay, we are doing this, and they call it strength endurance training. But in the end, it's hard really to say what is really happening there. And what you can do is that you were measuring the torque, so not looking at the watts or the power, but at the torque. And when we are looking at the torque, and when we're doing 8 RPMs at threshold and comparing this to 50 RPMs at threshold, you will see that the difference is torque is huge, and the torque is the strength, is how much strength you really apply to the pedal, and that's the difference between the different RPMs.
And the torque, that's something, just to make it practical, I guess, for somebody who is curious and want to try it. You can select that as a data field on your Garmin or your head unit if you go out and do a session, can't you? I haven't checked, but I think that you can.
Yeah, you can do this, and you can also then make an evaluation, for example, in Golden Cheetah. And if listeners are interested, just compare when you go at threshold and look at the torque there. And because there are also I have also some good talks with other coaches about something called like critical torque. So where is the torque value where you get the problems? So not the watts, not the power, but the torque. And it's a quite interesting topic. And I think when you are doing strength training on the bike, to have this data field torque is really interesting, because then you see really how much power you apply, and you can control your training over torque and not over the watts. There's always for sure a possibility to calculate from the watts and the cadence to the torque back, but it makes it easier if you see it on the screen and see, okay, now I go on 50 torque or on 60 torque or on 80, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, definitely. So what about the swim? I think that the run we already covered pretty well, or do you have anything that you want to add, any additional thoughts on run training in general, in addition to what you already talked about?
No, I think the most the biggest problem in running are especially when you come to high volumes or intensity is the kind of injuries that you can get, so that you have to be really careful about this, to not risk injuries, to be careful about the static. I don't find the right word in our talk today for this. I'm looking for one word, the biomechanical, but perhaps it comes later. But so that's the main point for the run. So to keep the athletes healthy, and to understand his what load is good for him. And also to work together with physiotherapists, with perhaps an athletic coach on his static, on making the body ready to be able to deal with the load. I think that's the main problem with running, and also if you want to go fast in training, you can do it perhaps on the bike. At some point, if you're used to, you can do it on the swim, but it's hard to go up with volume or intensity with really big steps in running. If you're doing this, and if you look back in injury history, injuries often happens when we have some kind of impact jumps in the run. So generally they happen there, and so that is something we have to avoid.
So sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, that's what I just want to add with the run. We have to take care of this.
Before we go on to the swim training, that triggered a question that I want to ask as well, with the intensity versus and volume debate, so to say. Where do you stand on that spectrum?
Oh, I don't want to put me on one of both of them, of the fields, because I think I believe that intensity and volume are important for training adaptation. It depends always on what you want to, which kind of adaptation you want to have, and at what point your athlete is. So we can, for the listeners, we can make it perhaps easy. We have, when we take the aerobic and the anaerobic system, and we have to deal with both systems and say, okay, how much of what where's the athlete for the moment? So do we have to focusing more on the aerobic system or on the anaerobic system, because we know that both systems are working against each other at some point. So I know there are also some short and intensive sessions that are working on the aerobic system for sure also, but in general it's like this. We have just to see, okay, where is the athlete for the moment? So he's in a state 1A. I want to bring him to state B for the competition, and what do I have to do to get there? And it's not about, okay, I just want to do short training with high quality or with high intensity, or doing just long training with low intensity, but it's just about, okay, which training tool do I now need to get from A to B? And I'm not in one of these, or I don't want to make one of the discussions what is better. It's just what do we need to get to the point. For sure, if you change something, so if you have an athlete who trained a lot shortly with high intensity, and you change this to a training regime with higher volume, just going easy but high volume, he will get better, because it's something new. It's a new impact. It's the body reacts on this, and he will get better. And the other way around too. So just an athlete who's just doing easy training the whole time, a lot of volume, and then bring him to some short intensity training. It's a little bit the example that I mentioned with the cyclist, with a new cyclist that I have. For sure, we'll also get better, because the body gets a new stimulus that it didn't get in the past. And if you don't overdo it, you will get a positive reaction. And this is even stronger with age group athletes. And but it's not about this is good and this is bad. It's always about which adaptation do I want to have, and which are the tools that I have to get there.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I need to figure out a better way to ask the question, because I don't want anybody to have to put themselves on one side of the spectrum or the other, because that's not the point of the question. Okay. So swim training then, if we walk through the different phases and the key points other than that as well that you see with swim training.
Some key points from swim training. I think in the swim training is one of the, when we look at the three disciplines, it's the most technical discipline on one point. So if I can choose, for example, in my situation with my triathletes, I have the bad situation that I cannot be on deck with my athletes, because I'm working for the cycling team, and that's my main job there. But if I can choose where to have a coach at which sessions, I would say, okay, in the swim session, because in the swim session there's a lot of technique going on. There's also a big influence from the other disciplines. If you get tired and go to the swim, you have a different position in the water, and at some point it's just not for nothing, but it's a completely different swim that the athlete is doing when he's too tired, and it could change. Or it makes the situation not better, but even worse. It's better to say, okay, go out of the pool and we continue tomorrow. What you in general don't have in this kind of on the bike, and only at some points in the run. So on one point, swimming quite technical. So you should have there a good support from a coach. And on the other side, it's about I think that's something Joel also mentioned. You don't have compared to the other disciplines, in long distance, you have 3.8K swimming. So I just say an hour. I know for the professional less, and perhaps for some more, an hour of the competition. So it's not that you will focus the whole training on swimming. So you have to find the right balance between how much swimming is necessary, but also enough, so that I can train in the run and on the bike. And so there, it's really important that your swim training is efficient. With efficient, I don't mean going on low volume and high intensity. I mean that you should have a technique that allows you to make this 4 or 5K or 3K or whatever you're doing in a session quite efficient, and focusing on the main thing. So not using too much time with playing around, but really, focusing on the stuff that is important. If you compare to swimmers, for sure, they have more time, more sessions to focusing on some small details. And that is something in triathlon that is, you can do it at the beginning of the season, but after, you need to focus on the main thing. And there we come back to my periodization, when you call it like this. The beginning, we're focusing on the technique, but then we try to get the speed, the strength, and the economization for the race, what is necessary. And so my main advice there is just try to have there a good coach on your side, or to go to a swim group where you get feedback from outside at some point, and not just swimming for years alone. The biggest improvement there will come from outside, not only from having training programs and doing the training programs, but also for getting some kind of feedback from outside.
Yeah, absolutely. That being said, I'm going to ask you about the workouts, example workouts for the different phases for the swim as well.
Mm-hmm. So should I tell you? Or?
Yeah. If you can walk through the technique and speed.
In the first phase, in the technique phase, this is it's like in the run. There are so much training, there is so much technique exercises that you can do in the swim. I think it's important to focusing, or we have to think about what will we do in the competition. It's an open water swim, so it's not all about having the best position in the water at normal conditions, or putting the hand exactly like this in the water. It's more about, I think like this, being able to catch enough water what you can push behind, so that you really feel that you that you really understand what you are doing. So what you are doing is you want to produce an effort that brings you forward. For this, you have to push back a lot of water, and so to give some kind of exercises that you feel this, that you get this feeling. It's not about the really sensitive one, but it's really about feeling the difference. For example, if you go slowly through water or fast through the water, so what changed with the speed of your arm, and get some experience in the water about how you can produce force that brings you forward. And there are a lot of exercises. This, from easy exercises up to with some small pedals, bigger pedals, which not mean that you should go all the time on pedals. It's just to give you a feeling about different pressures in water, different to feel really how you can produce this force that brings you forward. And so working on this, working on the technique, working on speed, so also being able to swim short, fast intervals, and then a big point is for sure the strength. For sure pedal work has with a lot of people a good impact, but also there we have to be careful at the point, because you see a lot of age group athletes wearing big pedals, but at the end they are not able to do the movement right. So they're using a big pedal, but at the end, when you would measure how much water they push away with this big pedal, it's quite a small amount, because they are not able to have a quite good arm stroke. And for this, it's up to the coach to decide, okay, now it's the point to come to this. So to introduce, for example, pedal in the training, because there are also other methods to work on strengths, like, I don't know, using parachutes, using different pants, using different intensities where you're also working on strength. And for example, I like to work when I work on strengths, also there on starting with short intervals, for example, 20 times 50 meters with a short rest of, let me say 10 seconds, and always focusing. It's not so much on the speed, so on the time that comes at the end, but really focusing on pushing away as much water as possible. That is one exercise for this. And the economization, there we are working with longer intervals. Longer intervals, I mean 400 to 800 meters intervals, with also their short recovery, because in the end we want to swim 3.8 Ks, but they are longer intervals with progression. For example, the first 800 is easy, the second 800 a little bit faster, the third 800 a little bit over race pace. So three times 800 is a setup that we are using quite often. At some points, with some athletes, we are also using some kind of 1 hour swim. So just one call it 1 hour testing, but just going 1 hour without recovery. But it is only some points in the year just to do it, to have some kind of reference. But also, it's a little bit for the head to do this kind of swimming. It's nice to do it in the lake, so like in a competition. But also in the pool, we are doing this, and it's also nice to see improvements for the athletes there in the pure endurance, and then if you have the possibility to see also what changes in the swim after 50 minutes to 30 minutes, 45 minutes, especially also in the stroke, so in the stroke frequency and in the speed, and to compare this to see how which impact the fatigue has on the technique, on how to deal with the situation. And so I want to keep it simple in the swim. That I think is the main message. Simple training, simple sets that you can compare time by time. So repeating sets several times during the period or during the year, because like this also the training is quite transparent. And it's always great if at the beginning of the year you're having a special set, you are able just to do it in a fresh condition. But then perhaps during the year you are also able to do the same set, but already when you are when you're fatigued from some other sessions. And it's also the big benefit. It's not always to be faster, but sometimes also to keep the same pace, even with some fatigue. And so that's from my side from the swim. In general, with my athletes, I have to say, generally they have the situation, so they go at some swim training, or they have a coach there with them where I get the details, or where I get the plans, or can tell them, okay, we want to do 4Ks today, 5Ks tomorrow. So that's a good situation that I have, that all my triathletes are there and have support, and I don't do this from distance.
Yeah, that's great. So wrapping it up a bit into a typical week, and without focusing too much on what the content of the sessions are, because that varies with the phase that you're in, but just, I guess, in terms of the swimming, biking and running, how much swimming, biking and running might your athletes be doing, and how would you structure them in the week with how many bikes, runs and swims, for example? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Do you talk about professional athletes?
Yeah, let's start with on the professional side.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so with the professional athletes for long distance, we have in 1 week about 4 to 5 swim sessions. So in general 4, and then depending a little bit on the period, but 4 to 5 swim sessions. In general, we have with these athletes 2 days where we are doing less training. Some people would call it recovery days, but they are training there. So there we have a little bit less training. So a general week could look like in the swimming, like having swimming from Monday to Wednesday, then with Thursday a day off, and then Friday and Saturday if we have 5 sessions, or just one of those days if we have 4 sessions. But most of the cases we have 5 swim sessions, even with the long distance athlete. And and there from these 5 sessions, we have 2 sessions that are perhaps a little bit shorter, about, let's say, 4Ks, with more focusing on the goal of the week. So if we have VO2max, we have VO2max session. If we have economization or threshold training, it's more on that. So there we have, let me call it the quality sessions, generally on Tuesday and Saturday. And then we have generally 2 easy sessions on the Monday and Friday. And then it depends a little bit on the period. If we have, for example, one session really long, so it is like in the run, like this the long one that everybody knows, it's also a long swim. that is and generally then on
Wednesday.
On Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday.
And how long would that swim be, for example?
For example, 6K, something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have the sessions.
Yeah. So and then the bike and the run, how do they fall into that week?
Yeah. So the bike sessions we have in general also, I would say 5 to 6. So 6 sessions if so I talk about general training. It could sometimes be that we have 2 bike sessions in one day, but we don't talk about this. We're just talking about general plan. Then we have 5 to 6 per week with generally an easy one on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we have a quality session. On Thursday, we have a long one. And then Friday, perhaps an easy ride, depending on the period. When we have 6 sessions, then on Friday also a ride. And then Saturday, in general, also an easy run. And Saturday and Sunday, or a long run or a quality one. That depends a little bit on the phase.
And the number of quality sessions then would be on the bike and the run and the swim combined. How many usually?
Yeah, so it's quality sessions on the swim in general 2, on the bike 2 to maximum 3, but in general also 2. And in the run, it's a little bit the same like with the bike, also 2 to 3. So perhaps if we have 3 on the run, we have 2 on the bike and the other way around. But quality not always makes really full gas or something like this, but this just mean not only easy riding or easy running. It means, okay, there's some kind of tempo change or something more than just easy.
Yeah. And the distribution of time between disciplines, like if you give an example of, I don't know how many hours it might be, but how many hours would be spent riding, running, and swimming?
That is now, really specific. I mentioned early in our call, it depends a little bit on how much the athlete can run. Because if you have an athlete long distance athletes who got problem to manage more than, for example, 60 or 70K a week, what is not less, but it's not really a lot for Ironman distance. But there you try to get to your aerobic training with the bike, so there the bike amount is even higher. But in general, I would say that you have I have just to calculate, because it's something it's always so individual, and now I try to find to just calculate it in general what it means in numbers. Yeah. Okay, so we have 5. So for the swim, when we have the 5 sessions, let's say we have about perhaps 115, so about, let me say 6 or 6.5 hours swimming. Then for the run, we have the 100. Perhaps for the run also 6 to 7 hours, and then on the bike 12 to 14. Just making that could be So for the swim, about 6 to 7 hours. For the run, also nearly the same, perhaps sometimes a little bit more, about 6 to 7 hours, and on the bike 12 to 14 hours. Then we are around 21, 28 hours. Then we have a little bit the distribution of hours when we talk about the 20-hour week. And for sure, we are also doing some kind of athletic training, or some athletes are doing strength training. So strength training and athletic training. With strength training, I mean with weights, and athletic training, what other people call core training. So then in a week like this, you would be around the 30 hour of training. Yeah. And then it changes a little bit depending on the athlete, and also depending on the training phase where you are in.
And just briefly, for an age grouper that might have 10 to 15 hours to train, and again, focusing on long distance, what do you think that they should be doing? Again, this of course depends on the individual, but the general case.
There, if we take now, for example, 15 hours of training, I would make the distribution of, so I would reduce it perhaps to 2, maximum 3 swim sessions, 2. So let me say about 2 hour or 2.5 hour swim. Then on the run, perhaps 4 to 4.5, and around 8 hours on the bike. Now I have just to calculate. What do we have? 5, 7. Yeah, it fits good.
And how many runs and bikes would that be for those durations?
For the runs, I would say we had about 3 to 4 runs.
Yeah.
Good. And for the bike, I would say 3 sessions.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. No, it's always very useful to get some examples, even though all listeners are, of course, already aware that individual cases are different, but it still gives sort of some reference points that are always good to learn from. A couple of. I know sorry, go on.
I think it's just important. You have to do a big. You have to put a lot of energy in the swim to get better in the swim. And that's why you always have to deal with how much does it brings me in the end, and the longest time you have on the run and on the bike. That's why in general we cut. Yeah, I would say, okay, cutting the swim to 2 sessions, and then had a little bit more time to more space for the other disciplines. And I think that's it's good, because if you're doing 3 swim sessions, you have to go to the pool. You have to do. It costs you a lot of time, and the outcome you'll be talking about perhaps some minutes. In a good case, and that's why I think if you have not so much time, it's good to reduce them.
Yeah. All right. So testing, like physiological testing and that sort of thing. How do you recommend using it, and how do you use the information that you get from that?
So first, if we're doing testing, you should also use the information to have an influence on the training, because if you're just doing testing to see to do the test, I think it's the worst thing you can do with your athletes. So if you're doing a testing, some kind of metabolic testing, I think we can now talk a lot about what you can do. So, but you are doing testing in the lab or on the field, it should always serve to see, okay, does my plan to come from state A to state B is on a good road? Or for example, if I'm focusing on go up with the VO2max, is this did it work or not? And if not, then it should have a consequence on what I will do the next time, or what I will do in the future. So when I'm doing testing, it's always to see what could be the next step and how did our work until now. So to see which kind of changes do we have. Because on the other part, the outcome we see does the athlete get faster? Is he able to push more watts? Is he able to swim faster? But what we sometimes don't see is where does the performance come from? So how much of it is it really from the aerobic system, and how much is it from the anaerobic system? Or what really got better? Was it just the economization? Has he now a bigger engine? Is it a mixture of both? In the end, for the performance for the athlete, it doesn't matter. But for the athlete, it doesn't matter. But for a coach, it's quite important to know to decide about the next steps.
Yeah, and it might matter for the athlete next year, because then the coach learned what worked or did not work.
But some athletes can really live good if you don't do any performance testing at all, as long as their performances are good. So it's not that they really need it. So that's why when you do it as a coach, it's important that the athlete understand why you are doing it, and to keep the amount so in a range that they always see a link to this. So not just doing testing, and it changed nothing, but that they see a link. Okay, we did the testing, that's the result. Okay, and that's why we are going on like that.
Yeah. Do you think it's as important for age groupers as it is for professional athletes, or what's your take on that? Is there a difference?
I think for at the beginning of the start of the training, or after the first weeks, it's always good to have a starting point, because age groupers, they put a lot of energy in their training. They had a lot of dreams of where they want to go, or what they want to achieve. So it's always good to have a realistic starting point, and also to have an to better understand what they are doing there. So for the age group athletes, I would always recommend to do some kind of testing after the first weeks of training to see their starting point, and then it's nice, at some point during the year, to control what did all the work did with my body, with myself, from the winter until the middle of the season, and to have some kind of confirmation and to get some kind of information about how the training is going. It's really useful, especially if you have yourself as an athlete knowledge behind it, or if you have a coach behind it. But for sure, it's not the main thing. It's not that you have really to do it, and you cannot do triathlon without doing some kind of diagnostic. But it's really useful, and sometimes it's more useful than to buy the most expensive bike. Perhaps it's better to invest more in the body, and to better understand his own body, and to learn from it, and perhaps to understand why a competition went good and perhaps went wrong, and to learn, like you said, for the next year, and to do the training more effectively and on a better way. And with the age group, we should never forget, if you combine this with a medical check, you also see if you're healthy, if everything in the body is going in the right direction, if your body is able to support the work. I think there are a lot of beneficial effects that you can have from performance testing.
Yeah. A few questions still. I know we're running long already, but we're close to wrapping it up here. But one thing that I want to hear your thoughts about is nutrition. So, like, both in terms of during training, but also day-to-day nutrition. Do you have any thoughts on that, and how athletes should be thinking about nutrition?
So nutrition, for sure, it has an importance. There are two sides. One side is the nutrition. So what the nutrition strategy for training or wasting. So for training, it could have an impact on how your training is working. So or how the cells are reacting to the training. And the other side, for sure, nutrition also has an importance for the recovery, for the well-being, for for the daily life. I think if you following a certain strategy there, so low carb, or if you're saying I want to eat no meat, or vegetarian, or whatever. So something that is away from eating a normal mixture of everything. So if you try to develop a nutrition strategy for yourself, I think it's always beneficial to have a talk with somebody, with a specialist, with a nutritionist or a coach who is involved in the topic, because there's no other topic on the market where there are so much changes and so much things that are not true that you can read in the internet or wherever than in nutrition. For example, when we look what people write about low carb or even no carb the last years, and when you saw how much athletes destroyed their metabolism by just bringing this to the edge, by perhaps not only following it but trying to make it really extremely, there's quite a big danger to what you can do wrong with nutrition, and you can do more wrong with nutrition than right, and that's my main message. And with this, I mean, for example, to stay with the low carb. It's not that low carb is something bad, but low carb can be used as a strong stimulus in training. But if you are using low carb, and if you go hard on training and on intensity, and if you get sick several times during the year, and you're always thinking, but perhaps it was just too hard for me, but it's just coming from not getting the body what it needs to bring that effort and to recover well, then it could be that you put a lot of effort in your training and just destroying it by not eating what your body is needing to have the kind of adaptation that you are looking for. And I think a big example is when you, for example, try to lose weight. And I saw this with athletes. They tried to lose weight, didn't eat any carbs at all, and at the end, when they measure, they lose weight. But what they measure was they lose muscle mass, and even their fat percentage grew up, and went down. So it was a big for them a big mess to see that their nutrition strategy didn't work well. Even by looking at having enough protein, it happened, but it just by trying to change their metabolism in a sport where carbohydrates, when you're going on high intensity, is necessary. For sure, on long distance, it's necessary that your body gets used to work with the fat oxidation. So also is able to use or to save the carbohydrate stores. But you have to take care there. You have to have a strategy that you have done together with somebody who is really deep in the topic, and not that you read something in a magazine. I think you should do it on your own. I think that's, like I said before, you can destroy more with bad nutrition that you can have an advantage of it.
So do you when you say that you can use it in training, does that refer to more limited periods, like even just on a daily periodization, or perhaps a block of a few weeks where you might have different nutritional strategies to improve the fat oxidation in training, or how do you work with it with your athletes with nutrition?
Yeah, exactly. That's the truth. You should use it during different periods, or for example, when you are doing this fat oxidation rites, to say, okay, starting, we are going the first 1 or 2 hours on low carb, so really a small amount of carbs, or even when you're more experienced on low carb, the first hours, then starting again to eat carbs. There's you can fix the amount of carbs you can take per hour there during the training session. But it's a training tool, so it's a tool that you are using, and you are also not doing all the time VO2max intervals or threshold intervals or whatever. You're just using it for some kind of adaptation in a specific period, and like this, it's a strong tool, and it works quite good to when you work, for example, in the economization phase on these long runs or long rides. When you go there on low carb, you can have some quite significant improvements that would take much more time if you would do it without it. Or even, for example, when you go on a long ride and you are full of carbs and eating always the carbs, for sure the body will take the carbs to get the energy. Even if you go on low intensity, it will take a lot of energy from the carbs. And like this, the body will not learn to use the fat oxidation. For sure, there you need it, but you need to have a plan how to get your body used to this and when to use it. And that's what I say. So it's could be a powerful tool in the training, but it's like every other training methods. You have to use it in the right moment, in the right dose, and not overdo it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And one more training question is on heart rate. That's something that I remembered in the seminar that you held, that you commented on, that heart rate is very, very important for you as a coach to use as a tool. Can you explain why that is and how you use it?
So I always see like this. I see when we taking, for example, a cyclist, the watts is always the watts, or the force, the power is always the input. So what the athletes give into the system, and the heart rate for me is the reaction. So the reaction, how is the body reacting on the power? How is it reacting on the speed during the runs? In the swim, it's much more difficult to really get it, but even there, at some intervals, you can measure. But you get a reaction from your body, and when the heart rate goes up, there's a reason for this. When people tell me, it was hot and the heart rate was higher, it was hot, the heart rate was higher, means higher stress for the body. Even if there's an explanation why the stress is higher, but it is a higher stress. And that's why for me, the heart rate is important to see how the body is dealing with the load. Especially an easy situation, you go out for easy rides, you always have at the first 20 minutes 120 average heart rate. At some day the heart rate is 130, from the beginning on. That's always the points where then athletes tell me, hey, coach, something. It just show me this. They don't get nervous, but they just tell me, hey, coach, the heart rate is a little bit higher. And then we can decide about we go on or perhaps we skip the intervals that we had planned. We go a little bit easier just to see what is happening for the next day. Or perhaps the athlete tell me, yeah, I drank more coffee than usually. So if there's an explanation for it, you can deal with it. But first, you have to see the information. Okay, the system is working on a higher level as usual. Why is it like this? And there are not so many parameters that we can measure so easily, like the heart rate, with a lot of information in it. Heart rate is for sure. It's not everything. It's not that we just skip everything when the heart rate is 1 or 2 beats higher, but it gives us some kind of information what is going on with the cardiovascular system. And that's why I would always recommend to have both in the bike, watts and heart rate. And if you have to choose, I would always go for heart rate, and also for the runs and for the for the runs. It's nice, especially in these long runs, especially when you have some constant effort. Always when there's a constant effort, heart rate is quite a good parameter to give an information about how the impact was on the body. For sure, if you are doing this short intervals, the heart rate cannot react so fast, so there it's difficult. But as long as when you have constant intervals or intensity or endurance, just on pure endurance, it's, I think, for age group athletes and for professional athletes an important parameter. And just to finish this, it's not that the athlete has always to look at his watch and look, oh, heart rate. No, for me, the athletes could even just shut down or just put something over the watch and just monitor it, so that you as a coach see, oh, what was going on there in the session. It's not that I say to an athlete, you only have to run at 120 to 130 heart rate. There are some athletes where I can do this, but there are other athletes that I tell them which I tell them, okay, just go on an easy run, on an easy ride or whatever. So it's not that they are completely fixed to this. It's just to measure or to get it, especially at the end of the session, and to better understand what is going on in the body.
Yeah, no, that really sums it up perfectly. Really, really good, and really interesting to hear that you would choose that overpower. That's I remember that when you said it, and you have very good explanations for why. So that's I think something that a lot of people will find interesting, because I think that the internet again is becoming quite power obsessed over heart rate, which that's quite a common trend that I see, at least. So that's one of the reasons that I wanted to discuss heart rate a little bit, because it is very important, and the ideal situation, as you say, is to be able to use both and have both. So
yeah, and just one small point. When we see now the differences in power meter, that we have some big gaps between how precise they are, you will never have this with heart rate monitors. Okay, if you have perhaps not the right belt, but when you're measuring heart rate, it's in general it's correct. So if you have a normal heart rate belt, but with the power meters, you have between 2% up to 5, 6, 7, 8% of differences, and that is already a really objective reason to say, okay, perhaps I need a measuring device that is quite more precise.
Yeah. So let's move into the rapid fire questions, and these are very short, one sentence. And the first one is: what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon or endurance sports?
My favorite book for endurance sports is it's a cycling book of Fred Grapp, Cyclisme et optimisation de la performance. It's in French. I really like it because it touches a lot of topics, and that's why I like it.
I need to brush up my French then. I used to speak French, but I forgot it from lack of use.
For the moment, there's no translation in English. That's why,
Okay, great. What do you wish you had known or done differently at some point in your career?
I'm happy with my career, how it was until today. perhaps I would do something different when I was a federation coach, just to following more my own view from training and how to coach the athletes. That was the only point. So not getting too much influence by outside. That is something I would change now, but for the rest, I'm happy.
And finally, who's somebody in triathlon or endurance sports that you look up to and admire?
I would not say there are some special persons. I really like some coaches out there who are quite successful, but still stay on the floor, and that you can when you talk to them and when you exchange them. I just mentioned before. I mentioned Joel. He's one of them. So it's more some kind of respect for the success and the work what they are doing, and on the other side having great personalities. And there are a lot of people in high performance sports around like that. And I'm happy that I'm able to meet these people and even have some friends in this area. So it's not that it's a look up, it's more respect. And it's really nice to make, to meet these people.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dan, for this, your generous time that you've given us today. Are there any social media or website outlets that listeners can follow you, or perhaps your cycling team, Bora Hansgrohe, or anything else that you want to mention?
Yeah, for sure. We are happy with every fan we have with the Bora Hansgrohe pro cycling team. And for people who are interested, I'm on also on Instagram with Dan Lorang. You will find me there. Just if you are interested in some picture from daily life. But for me, it's important to follow the athletes, and so follow the Bora Hansgrohe team and some of my triathletes, and they will really enjoy this.
And since we didn't mention that already, can you mention who are the triathletes that you coach that people might know about?
Yeah, for example, Jan Frodeno, Anne Haug, or Justus Nieschlag on the short distance, and Sarah True. So to mention these four.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Thanks again so much. It was a great pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Okay. Thank you very much to have me, and perhaps meet you again somewhere in Lisbon or somewhere else.
Let's hope so.
Okay, cool. So we stay in touch. Have a nice day.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview. I definitely enjoyed talking to Dan again. And I have two key takeaways, although everything was important, but two things that I want to highlight here at the end of the interview for you. The first one is just a reminder of the structure that Dan talked about in terms of how to structure the training season with 4 different phases, and that you would cycle through a few times depending on how your races fall. So the first cycle or the first phase would be the technique phase. Then you would go onto a speed or VO2max phase, then a strength endurance phase, and then an economization phase. And then perhaps you end that first cycle with a race, a 70.3 perhaps, and then you repeat again. You might have another race, and then you repeat again, and you might have your key goal race at the end. Just as an example. And do go back and listen to this interview to get examples of what exactly you might do in each of those different phases, if this is an approach that you want to try. Then the second key takeaway is what we discussed in the very beginning of the interview on focusing on maximum adaptation. And this is where you really need to think long and hard about what maximum adaptation is for you, or you need to discuss this with your coach and individualize your approach. But just to give you an example, if technique is a big limiter for you, then perhaps maximum adaptation might mean that you spend more time in that technique phase, and which still might mean less training overall, because you want to perform everything with good technique. So you're not really focusing on maximizing training, but you're maximizing adaptation, because those technique improvements might be for you what will give you the most return on training investment. So maximum adaptation, that should be something that you focus on, definitely. And regardless of what shape it takes, it can take various different shapes, of course, depending on you as an individual, your strengths and weaknesses, your target events, etc. But that main objective of maximum adaptation, rather than just maximum training, is very important to keep in mind. So as usual, you can find the show notes for this episode on thattriathlonshow.com. And I want to just take an opportunity to thank everybody who's listening, because in the last few episodes here on the podcast, we've heard from Joel Filiol, Philip Skiba, and now Dan Lorang. And these are three of the real heavy hitters in triathlon and in endurance sports in general. And this would not have been possible, I don't think, in the earlier days of the podcast. So really a heartfelt thank you to all you loyal listeners, and of course to all the new listeners as well, because it is the steady growth of the podcast that allows me to bring on great guests like these. So whether you've been listening from the start or you're brand new to the podcast, thank you. A special thank you, of course, to everybody who's been rating and reviewing. Big 5 stars to all of you guys. Every single rating and review goes a long, long way in helping the podcast grow, and therefore also getting the best guests in the industry onto the podcast. So if you haven't yet left a rating and review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever, then please consider doing so if you think that the podcast deserves it. It only takes a couple of minutes, but it does make a huge difference. Finally, big thank you to our sponsors, Roka, that you can find on roka.com, and use the promo code TTS, all caps, to get 20% off your entire order. And also thank you to Precision Hydration that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Use the promo code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps, to get your first box of electrolytes for free. And also a quick reminder that, as I talked about in the last Q&A episode, if you are a digital marketing specialist, Precision Hydration are hiring for that position. So be in touch with them. Andy mentioned this to me after I interviewed him for that Q&A expert guest appearance. So I just wanted to mention that here as well, because this audience might have great potential to have somebody in it that is interested in that job. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.